I'm a big social justice fan myself, so I didn't realize that that was part of your mandate, but I think the idea of the arts producing positive change is a very powerful one. I'm not sure that we can make art do things, but art can certainly do things to us, and if it does expose us to experiences which we would otherwise not have, and open our minds to other ways of being and other ways of feeling and experiencing, then we have let art do what it wants to with our lives, and that can indeed produce some very constructive change. The ballets that I was going to talk about do indeed have some powerful women in them. Before I jump to the chase, I was thinking, well, you know, it's February and it's Valentine's Day, and so, you know, we want to talk about relationships. And whenever I think about, you know, relationships in art, the first thing I think of is Leo Tolstoy, you know, saying that all happy families are alike and all unhappy families are unique in their unhappiness. And I think love affairs are like that. You know, everybody believes that the happy couple, they're all the same. And I think that's because that kind of iconic happy relationship, that perfect love affair, it's a fantasy. And of course, we make art based on our fantasies. So we have, you know, in the ballet world, we have a lot of ballets that are based on fairy tales, that are based on famous love affairs, Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. But when we go to the ballet, we suddenly find out that the way these stories are told and the way the characters appear to us are not what we had perceived from the little sketch, you know, that we carry around in our heads. You know, we carry around a literary sketch of the Sleeping Beauty, and that sketch, I think, goes something like, there's a princess, and she gets given all kinds of feminine charms. She's beautiful, she has long golden hair, her voice is sweet, she never argues, she's accomplished in dainty things that don't really matter, she sings well, she has nice needlework, and eventually a prince comes and marries her, you know, gives her life purpose. You go to the ballet and you find out, well, that's not actually what goes on in that story at all. And I think the reason that the ballet tells such a different story from the literary sketch is that words can very, very easily spin an image, can very easily take you someplace where you couldn't possibly be. Language is abstract, it's about ideas, and you can have a perfect idea. You can imagine things that are not even possible. You know, what is it Alice in Wonderland says, I can imagine 14 impossible things before breakfast. And then Lewis Carroll goes on to tell you exactly what those 14 things are. When you go to the ballet, you can't do that. Ballet, in spite of the fact that it deals with imagination, is about what actually is. Right? That man actually has to touch that woman. That body has to go from point A to B in a certain amount of time. And of course, it requires tremendous imagination to think that might be possible. You know, to think that a woman is going to support all her weight on one foot, meanwhile making it look easy. You know, the first ballerina to imagine that, she didn't know it was possible, right? She was imagining into the realm of what might be. But her artistry was that she found a way to make it happen. And then she could show other people, this is possible, this is reality. And most of so all ballet is like that. Everything that you see on the stage actually happens. There is no magic. What's wonderful about it is that there's a link between the imagination of what might be and what human beings can actually realize. And that includes not just physical things, but relationships. So, for example, you go to see, I was going to tell you, yeah, like this happens to everybody. This, you know, it's addictive seeing that moment when you realize I had not thought it possible, and then I saw somebody actually do it. And this happened to me when I was 4 or 5, and my parents took me to see Die Fledermaus, The Old Men. And of course, there's a ballet in Die Fledermaus, and we were sitting, you know, up in the 4th ring, and I was 4 years old, and what did I know? And the ballet was happening, and you know, all the men were lifting these women. And I said to my dad, how did they teach those tiny little girls? They can't be, you know, they're 6 or 7. How did they teach them to remember all those steps? And my dad said, oh, no. Those are not little girls. Those are women the size of your mother. Those guys are just very strong. And in that moment, I wanted to become a ballet dancer, because the idea that you could develop yourself, not that I, you know, at 4, I certainly didn't, you know, write a thesis on it, but I think the idea that you could, by practice, by will, by courage, that you could do something that looked impossible, I thought, I want to do that. I had never before seen anyone surpass my imagination, and there it was in front of me. And I think that's what, you know, most people find addictive about ballet. It expands your view of what the human being is capable of. So when you go to the ballet and you see, for example, Sleeping Beauty, and you think you're going to see this story about this retiring, ultra-delicate, in need of care princess, you see a reality which is really quite different. The first act starts, and Aurora comes on stage, and there are 4 suitors who want to marry her. The way they present their, the way they pay court to her is each one is offered the chance to be her partner in a dance. This is a very famous dance. It's called the Rose Adagio, because they each present her with a rose, before they begin dancing. But what's significant about it is that she doesn't need any of them. Ordinarily, the male dancer stands behind or beside, or in some point of contact with the female dancer, and helps her to balance or supports her while she stands with all her weight on the tip of her shoe. In this Rose Adagio, every time one of these prospective suitors offers her a hand, she takes it for a moment, and then she takes it away, and she's balancing by herself, unaided, unsupported, completely self-reliant, but still, only standing on that one foot. And she does that 4 times, once with each of the suitors. And we understand from that, whether we think about it or not, that this is a very, very self-reliant young woman. She does not need anybody. She does not need her parents. She does not need those suitors. And what we also understand from it, we take one look at it and we realize, well, that would be really frightening to take that risk in front of 3,000 people. And yet, she seems utterly unfazed. If anything, with each balance, with each rejection of the suitor, with each time she takes away her hand, she seems more and more confident. And we realize this is not only a character of tremendous courage, but a human being of tremendous courage. This is not the weak feminine, which, in spite of the fact that we hope things have changed, we still think of, women are physically, in general, on average, weaker than men. They're shorter, they're smaller, whatever. That certainly has not stopped this particular young woman from being remarkably, remarkably courageous. And then when finally the prince who does marry her in the 3rd act shows up, he only gets there by equaling her courage. Right? He has to hack away all the brambles. He has to withstand the interference of the malevolent spirit. And in spite of the fact that it takes him a fair amount of courage to do all that, he has the support of the good fairy, to tell him where to go and what to hack at. So in fact, the Aurora is welcoming him into her life rather than her waiting for his rescue. And the pas de deux that they dance at the end, rather than being a more traditional, I stand behind you and hold you up, very often they're side by side, and they'll do, like, this is called high fifth or fifth-ono, right? Of course you can do it by yourself, but if you are 2 people standing hand in hand, one person can do one arm and the other person can do the other arm, and you can physically, visually demonstrate they are 2 halves. We have very firmly printed in our minds by the 3rd act that picture of her of Aurora balancing by herself. She repeats the same thing with the prince that she marries, but instead of putting both hands above her head, she holds one to the side and the other above her head, and as she balances, the prince puts the other arm there. So again, we have that sense that he accepts her independence. He welcomes the fact that she doesn't particularly need him. And then the next part of the pas de deux, she does something which is called a fish dive, which involves her turning by herself, and then she throws herself towards the floor, and the prince grabs her with one arm and makes a nice shape, like a fish a bit. And and we see from that from this acceptance of self-reliance and partnership, that you can take risk. You can do beautiful things which you could not do by yourself. So the whole ballet is in fact a journey from I can do it by myself to the acceptance, to the celebration of there are things that I can only do with another person. So I only get that from the ballet. I don't get that from reading the fairy tale. And somebody else might come in, and maybe some of you will disagree with that, and I'm happy to hear that. Or if you have another point of view, but I don't know. I find it very interesting that my model of what a relationship should be like is kind of based on that pas de deux. I want that magic that I see on the stage. That's what I want from a relationship. I get a little bit the same thing out of Cinderella. Another one of those. Supposed to be about a girl rescued from poverty and obscurity by a rich man. And there are probably some stage versions that are a little bit like that. On the other hand, the National Ballet does James Kudelka's version of Cinderella. And the story is really quite different. What Cinderella brings to the prince's life is structure and order. And not just order in the sense of, that things are well arranged, but order in the sense of what should come first, what's a priority. She shows up at the ball, and the prince, is instantly captivated by how simple she is, and how direct. And he falls in, he begins dancing with her. In a book we would say falls in love with her. Actually, we don't know that when we're at the ballet. We just see that they dance together and that it works really well. Their steps complement each other. They actually fit together. Her phrases, when danced alone, are very beautiful, and so are his. And then Kudelka has them put those phrases in the same space at the same time. And we see that actually, when his hand was like this, and her hand was like that, now that they're in the same space, they're touching each other. And what's lovely about that, in terms of order, in terms of priority, is that they've discovered they meshed with each other before he's even asked her name. And it's a comedic point in the ballet. The prince goes to introduce her to the rest of the people at the ball, and has to turn back and say, and then he says, here's Cinderella. So there's that point of first things first. When the prince goes, so she's strung her shoe, and he goes chasing around the world looking for her, and he comes to Cinderella's house. And what we notice about the house is that, back in the first act, when by the time the two sisters have gotten dressed to go to the ball, they've made the house a tip. I don't want this, and I don't want that, and it's all over the floor, and it's a big mess. Cinderella comes home from the ball, and she's like, I can't go to bed like this. And she, straightens up the entire house. She makes it a place of serenity and order. And when the prince comes to find someone to wear the shoe, she doesn't think it's her. She doesn't think this is all this prince stuff, all this notoriety, all this fame. So she's hiding behind her feather duster. And so the prince can't see her face. It's not her beauty. It's not her exterior that causes him to recognize that young woman to try the shoe on. He recognizes somehow this order, this sense of peace, this sense of everything has a place and it's in its place. That must come from that woman with the feather duster. She must have something to do with it, and he turns her around and then sees, this is the woman I danced with at the ball. And then they go into the garden, and of course, that's the place where natural order reigns, and everything is arranged so that every organism can flourish. And that's where the ballet ends. And then the last love story that I wanted to talk about is Romeo and Juliet, which, you know, again, it's one of those, we know it's a sad story, but somehow we think it's the perfect love. You know, it's only such a pity the stars got in the way. It's only such a pity they came from the wrong families. I don't think that's what happens in that ballet at all. I think what happens in that ballet is that two young children are allowed an irresponsible course of action and they pay for it. And I think that's what Shakespeare wanted us to know. When you look, you know, when you actually start reading the text. But it's up to a director, I think, to give that a physical form, because it's very hard to get away from these little snippets of fantasy that we carry around in our heads. Everybody knows Romeo and Juliet's about the perfect love, right? You don't think, oh yeah, that's that sad story about how they were not properly chaperoned and committed suicide. You know, I mean, suicide is somehow romanticized. No, they're dead. It's really sad. You know, you want to bury your 14-year-old daughter? I sure as hell don't. There should, you know. In any case, the version that the National Ballet does now is by this choreographer named Alexei Ratmansky, and I think he read the play very closely and thought he has children, and I think he thought very hard about what's really going on in this story and in this ballet. And what you notice is that you know, you want to blame the parents. You want to say they're mean, they're cruel, you know, they should give their daughter a little freedom, they should listen more to her, they should care more about her future. Well, in fact, they really do. They are trying to get her a good marriage. They are trying to get her a life of relative comfort. The people who mess things up are the friar and the nurse, right? The friar has these crazy ideas that somehow God is going to intervene because it's about love, and suddenly everybody's going to forgive each other even though they've been killing each other for 25 years. And the nurse has these romantic ideas that you know, that love is going to conquer all, and oh, it's so romantic and it's so secret, and it reminds me of when I was young and I played her. You know, she tells the story, you know, to Juliet about how when she weaned her, which is, and you know, her not husband, she's not married, although maybe he's dead, who knows. But in any case, the nurse's husband tells a very bawdy story, you know, to the young Juliet, who's, what, 3 years old, she's being weaned. You know, he says to her, "You'll stop crying." You know, she falls on her head. And he says to her, "You'll fall backwards when you're older, and that will make you cry." You know, which means, you know, you will fall backwards for men. You know, you will have sex, and you will have different things to interest you. You should not be saying this to a 3-year-old, even though she's not going to understand it. You know, this is a completely romanticized version of you know, what happens between men and women. It's highly misogynistic. You know, it's very, very you know, puts all the power with the guy. And the nurse thinks that's romantic. She thinks it's lovely that Juliet is going to elope with Romeo, and they have he has no way. How is he going to take care of her? How is he going to, you know, provide her with the same care that her parents were trying to arrange for her? He's not. You know, that's not what's going to happen. Anyway, so the tragedy happens. They commit suicide, and in the final tableau, we see the Duke of Verona, the representative of order and justice, the guy who said, next person to start a duel, exiled. You know, the guy who said, this is not how young men should behave. This is not boys being boys. This is dead bodies in the street. I want order. I want peace. I want people to have a chance to live well, not to get killed by the time they're 21 over some stupid duel. You can see guilt and shame just overwhelm this poor friar. He realizes how how irresponsible he has been in his fantasy and in his reliance on a higher power to take care of people when it's actually his job here on Earth to do the taking care of. And he kneels at the Duke's feet, and the Duke kind of, you know, puts his hand on his head as if to say, you know, we're all human, we all make mistakes, you know, go and sin no more kind of thing. But I thought I would finish with that picture of reality forgiving fantasy, because I actually think that's what makes a great relationship, is that you live in the real world and you forgive each other your fantasies, and you accept the fact that what happens here and now is way better than the thing you imagine that will never take place. So.